On Monday, December 10th, 1923, Harvey Willow had gone out hunting by himself and hadn't returned. Annie, his wife, had taken the kids to her parents' house near Kratzerville the evening before, telling them she was worried about his disappearance. Then they returned to their house on the Marburger farm for a long night of watching the door. Harvey's dog returned the next morning, but not Harvey. Thomas Gemberling, former county treasurer and a friend of Harvey, gathered a small search party, and after a little trampling around the dry woods to the northwest of the farm, Sheriff Arthur Fox found Harvey's bloodied corpse. Join me today as I take you back to the 20th century Monroe Township in Pennsylvania. The murder of Harvey Willow. Harvey Cleveland Monroe farmed on the edge of Apps Woods in Monroe Township, just across Penns Creek to the north of the borough of Selinsgrove. He had hired two men helping him work the farm, George Wetzel and Ralph Shaddle. It was an arrangement that Harvey knew well. He, too, had worked in his youth as a hired farm labourer. He was born on Christmas Day 1884 and raised by Emmanuel and Mary Ebby Willow, who farmed around the Selinsgrove area. When he turned 15, he left the household to work for a fellow Perry County farming family. He married Annie Kratzer in 1907 when he was 22 years old. He had never been part of the respectable crowd in the area. In 1914, he spent time in prison after killing a man in a New Year's Eve bar fight in Selinsgrove. The Selinsgrove Times described him as part of a thuggish group of brawlers led by his father-in-law. Luther Kratzer and his boys stuck their iron knuckles in their pockets New Year's Day. When he cold-cocked George Spade squarely in the jaw at the bar of the local hotel, Spade fell and smashed his head against the concrete. He was convicted of involuntary manslaughter and spent a year in the county jail. When he was released from jail, he worked on the farm of Eva Marburger, the widow of Selinsgrove's wealthiest residents. Annie Kratzer, daughter of Emma Catherine and Martin Luther Kratzer, was born around January 10, 1887, in Middleburg, PA. She left school at the age of 12 and from then on helped her mother keep the family house. She was 20 years old when she got married, so she was considered a minor and needed parental permission to marry Harvey Willow on July 4, 1907. She lived in Middleburg before marrying and then moved with Harvey to various townships within Snyder County. She had two children in 1914 and 1917. Her first child, named Harvey, died of bowel infection shortly after birth in 1911. Annie kept the house, raising her kids and performing the dozens of tasks necessary to keep a farming household running in early 20th century. It was not an easy life. She had her first child when Harvey was serving his year in county jail. On Monday, December 10, 1923, Harvey Cleveland Willow left his home near Selinsgrove to go hunting in Apps Woods. Harvey knew those woods very well, almost as well as he knew his own children, and he never thought that he might not come back. When he didn't return by Tuesday morning, his wife grew worried. She sent their 11-year-old son, Glenn, to ask a neighbor if he had seen Harvey. The neighbor, Louis Gemberling, found Harvey's body in a patch of woods on Norman App's property. Tragically, Harvey had been shot in the back of the head. This event marked the start of one of the most shocking crimes in Snyder County's history. The state police from Troop C in Pottsville took on the investigation, but it was a young boy who found the first clue. Just 13 feet away from where Harvey's body lay, a boy named Renninger discovered a yellow shotgun shell, specifically a Winchester 12-gauge. At first, the police didn't think much of it, as they had already searched the area and believed someone might have planted the shell to confuse the investigation. Snyder County had a reputation for illegal moonshining, and some people thought that Harvey might have been killed by a bootlegger after accidentally finding a hidden still. Others speculated that he was murdered for money, as he had $100 with him to pay for a bill in Middleburg that day. But that money was missing from his body. Harvey's family leaned towards the theory that he was robbed. Martin Luther Kratzer, Harvey's father-in-law, told the coroner's jury he believed Harvey was accidentally shot by a careless hunter who then ran away. However, some whispered that the 15-year-old girl related to Harvey was dating one of the main suspects, a man known for his shady dealings, although he was not known to be violent. The most popular theory was that Harvey had been killed out of revenge. 9 years earlier, he had been involved in a fight that led to the death of an elderly farmer named George Spade. Harvey, along with Martin Luther Kratzer and his son Ralph, had gone looking for trouble on New Year's Day and ended up confronting Spade. In a fight, Harvey hit Spade, causing him to fall and hit his head on the curb, which led to Spade's death. Harvey served a year in jail for this incident. After Harvey's body was found, many in the community wondered if a relative of Spade had been waiting for the right moment to seek revenge for the old man's death. On December 17th, 5 state police officers arrested a neighbor named Miles Klein and questioned him at the courthouse in Middleburg. They used questionable methods to try to get him to confess. They questioned him again on December 19th, but they didn't gather enough information to make an arrest. The repeated questioning of Klein, along with the state police's silence, led local newspapers to report the investigators had not found any new leads. This turned out to be true, as on December 22nd, the officers left Selinsgrove and returned to Pottsville. District Attorney William K. Miller was frustrated that the state police had given up so quickly. Unlike the famous Canadian Mounties, the Pennsylvania State Police had a reputation for failing to catch criminals, having struggled with many high-profile cases, like the confusing Lambs Gap murders and the mysterious killing of a Mennonite church worker named Norman Betchel. In mid-January, D.A. Miller announced he would ask the county court to appoint a special detective to take over the case, which the state police had abandoned. His request was granted, and Judge Miles Potter appointed Selinsgrove Constable Francis Gemberling as county detective. In March, the Snyder County Commissioners, following Judge Potter and Detective Gemberling's advice, decided to offer $1,000 reward for information leading to the arrest of Harvey Willow's killer. In a sparsely populated place like Snyder County, where everyone knew each other, Gemberling believed that secrets wouldn't stay hidden for long. For the cash-stamped families living along Penns Creek, the promise of a large reward was enough to encourage people to speak up, and soon tips began to come in. By May, local newspapers hinted that a significant breakthrough in the investigation was on the horizon. Trooper Arthur R. Fox from the state police was sent to Snyder County as a special investigator and started working with Detective Gemberling. As May came to a close, rumors spread that Trooper Fox had found important evidence that pointed to someone close to Harvey Willow, not a distant moonshiner or an unlucky hunter. Fox wouldn't confirm or deny these rumors, but did mention that the case was very complicated, like a cobweb. Major Lynn G. Adams, the superintendent of the state police, traveled from Harrisburg to meet with Fox. The next day, Trooper Fox went to court, suggesting he was planning to ask the judge for a search warrant. 17-year-old Ralph Harrison Shadle worked on Harvey Willow's 60-acre farm. He wasn't just a farmhand. He was close to the family and often went hunting with Harvey. To Harvey, Ralph was almost like a family member. However, if Ralph had been paying more attention, he might have noticed 2 men hiding in the shadows, watching him closely and following him everywhere. Fox and Gemberling had been keeping an eye on Ralph for weeks, spending hours in the woods watching him at the Willow home and observing how he interacted with Annie Willow and her children, Glenn and Ivor Catherine. They found it strange that Ralph seemed to have distanced himself from his friends in Selinsgrove. Previously, he went to Selinsgrove with Miss Willow to run errands. He would always park his car on Market Street. Recently, though, he had started parking on dark side streets and staying in the car, as if he didn't want to be seen by any of his old friends. Fox and Gemberling thought this change in his behavior was very suspicious. In a daring move, Trooper Fox had two of his officers hide a dictaphone inside the Willow home. This device recorded conversations onto wax cylinders. As luck would have it, a calf belonging to the Willows had fallen ill. Fox and Detective Gemberling helped Ralph and Annie care for the sick calf in the barn, which gave the officers a chance to secretly place the listening device. They opened a window and hung an amplifier outside, allowing them to hear any conversations after they returned from the barn. Fox and Gemberling started things off by announcing their plan to exhume Harvey's body, hoping to create a reaction from Annie. After alarming her, they left the house. However, there was a problem. The two troopers who were supposed to be listening in had either got bored or distracted. Fox found them loafing by his car, clearly visible instead of hiding in the bushes where they should have been. They missed the important moment after the officers left. When the troopers finally settled into their positions, it was quiet inside the Willow home since Annie and Ralph had gone upstairs to bed. Fortunately, the dictaphone was sensitive enough to capture the sounds of Ralph and Annie's intimate conversations. The next challenge was to retrieve the listening device from the home. The following morning, Fox and Gemberling returned. While Fox kept Annie occupied in the kitchen, Gemberling waited by the window, trying to reach inside and unplug the dictaphone. He struggled to reach it, and just then, Annie walked into the room and grabbed a photo album. She saw Gemberling halfway through the window and exclaimed, "What do you think you're doing? My God, you scared me." "Just trying to fix your screen," Gemberling quickly replied, thinking on his feet to avoid suspicion. Annie went back to the kitchen with her album, giving Gemberling a chance to finish his task. After retrieving the device, Fox and Gemberling returned to Selinsgrove, only to find out that the state police headquarters had shut down the investigation again, ordering Fox to go back to Pottsville. Frustrated, the two men discussed their next move and decided to take an even bolder step. They would arrest Ralph Shadle, question him about what they had overheard, and hoped he would confess. Ralph Shadle was interrogated by Trooper Fox in Middleburg, and during the questioning, he admitted to shooting his 38-year-old boss, Harvey. Ralph explained that he had come to live with the Willows in March 1923, after Harvey rented the Marburger farm in Monroe Township. Almost immediately upon arriving, Annie Willow began to seduce him. She eventually asked Ralph to get Harvey out of the way so they could be together. On Monday, December 10th, Harvey and I were working around the barn in the morning, Ralph told Trooper Fox. Harvey said, "Let's go hunting." So I went to get my gun. When I got back to the house, Annie said, "Now, Ralph, you shoot Harvey and make sure you do it right." After that, we went out to the back of the house for a bit. I told Harvey that his brother said there were lots of rabbits up in App's woods. According to Ralph Shadle, as he and Harvey walked through App's field, he stayed a few steps behind before he fired the first shot. Harvey screamed and fell to his knees. Ralph quickly reloaded, moved closer to Harvey, and shot him in the back of the head at point-blank range. Afterward, Ralph told Annie what he had done. She then instructed him to call her brother, Ralph Kratzer, and say that Harvey was missing. With the Kratzers, Ralph pretended to search for the body all morning. When Trooper Fox asked about the missing money, Ralph admitted that he and Annie had made up the story about Harvey carrying cash to make it seem like he had been robbed. Annie was arrested on August 5th. She had previously claimed that Harvey threatened her life multiple times and had even thrown an axe at her in anger. She said she would have left him, but stayed for the children's sake. Despite the Kratzer family's bad reputation in Snyder County, they refused to help Annie while she was in jail. While they were known for fighting, Ralph and Martin Luther Kratzer drew the line at murder. Instead, the Reformed Church of Selinsgrove came to her aid, offering prayers and hymns at the Middleburg jail and passing around a collection plate to help care for the Willow children. District Attorney Miller aimed for a first-degree murder conviction when Ralph Shadle's trial started on October 6th. However, the jury found him guilty of second-degree murder on October 11th, which was also Shadle's 18th birthday. Ironically, the jury gave him a life-saving gift. He avoided the electric chair and was sentenced by Judge Potter to 10 to 20 years in Eastern Penitentiary. The jury was likely influenced by the closing argument from Shadle's defense attorney, A. Francis Gilbert. He explained Ralph's actions by saying, "Many men have avoided the death penalty for crimes committed while drunk. So how about this boy who was intoxicated by a far stronger influence, a bad woman?" Ralph smiled when Judge Potter told him how lucky he was, and he served his sentence obediently. After his release, he lived a clean and quiet life. Annie's trial began the following week, with Emmanuel E. Pauling, a Francis Gilbert, and a former federal judge, Albert W. Johnson, as her defense team. Annie took the stand in her own defense on October 15th. She talked about how badly her husband had treated her, saying, "He was cruel to me. He kicked me, choked me, and threw me down the steps." During her testimony, she denied knowing anything about the murder and tried to blame it all on Ralph, saying, "Shadle wanted me to put rat poison in Harvey's food, but I wouldn't." Ralph was called to testify for the prosecution. He explained the time and details of Harvey Willow's killing, but he wasn't cross-examined because his lawyer argued that this could further incriminate him. When Ralph walked into the courtroom, Annie turned her back to him, and they avoided making eye contact throughout the trial. One of the most dramatic moments of the trial happened when Dr. E.R. Decker, the Willow family's doctor, testified for the prosecution. He revealed that he had given Annie Willow a truth serum without anyone's permission. While Annie was in jail, Dr. Decker had injected her with morphine and then followed it up with scopolamine. This became a turning point for the defense because the doctor admitted he was confused by what Annie had said. "She didn't tell me what I expected," Dr. Decker said, explaining that he thought she would share shocking secrets. Instead, Annie talked a lot about Ralph Shadle, but not as the murderer. She focused on Ralph as the farmhand who helped bring in coal. "Either she is innocent, or the drug didn't work," the doctor concluded. Annie's defense team, which included lawyers Pauling, Gilbert, and Johnson, argued for her freedom. They portrayed her as a naive woman who had suffered abuse and was manipulated by a charming young man. They claimed she had tried to talk Ralph out of committing murder but had stayed silent for months out of fear for her own life. To support this, the defense presented letters that Ralph supposedly wrote to Annie from jail after confessing. In these letters, he claimed he had lied to the detectives and cleared Annie of any blame. However, the prosecution brought in a witness named Wetzel, a former farmhand who had been caught in bed with Annie, and they got Sheriff John Runkle to testify that the paper used for these letters was the same type he had given only to Annie. The defense's questionable tactics didn't stop there. Just before the jury was set to start deliberating, the original indictment that the whole trial was based on mysteriously disappeared. Without this document, all the testimony from the trial would be thrown out. It was last seen in the hands of Annie's attorney, Albert Johnson, who was criticized by Judge Potter for gross negligence. Despite the missing indictment, Judge Potter ordered the jury to reach a verdict, promising to find the lost document later. Outside the courtroom, there was a campaign to gain sympathy for Annie. Few local newspapers mentioned Wetzel, and those that didn't focus on his inappropriate relationship with her. Instead, the media published staged photos of Annie reading her Bible and her children looking sad. One particularly staged image showed Glenn and Ivor sitting on their porch in their Sunday best, embracing and gazing solemnly at a photo of their mother. The strategy was clear. If the newspaper could sway just one juror, Annie could walk free. However, the jurors were not easily fooled. Annie Willow was found guilty of second-degree murder and sentenced to 10 to 20 years in prison, which she served at the Allegheny County Workhouse in Blonox. In January 1935, both Ralph Shadle and Annie Willow were released early for good behavior and returned to Monroe Township. They had kept in touch through letters while in prison and had talked about getting married one day. But that plan never happened. Soon after her release, Annie married another man named Aaron Valentine and moved to Dauphin, where she lived until her death in 1958 at the age of 71. Ralph Shadle also married shortly after, in March 1937. He wed Pearl Elizabeth Clotfelter, and they had 2 sons together. Ralph passed away in 1982 at the age of 75.